Hi, everyone. Today I brought you an interesting news story. I hope you like it and listen to it carefully so you can leave your comments later. My name is Sarah, but everyone calls me Sorry. I'm 29 years old and I live in a coastal city where the sea seems to have no end. I married Mark 5 years ago, a man who carries the mark of tiredness on his face and the weight of promises he never managed to keep on his back. He works as a night watchman at a gas station, a hard and poorly paid job, but it still helps us pay the bills. I've always been a bit discouraged, trying without wanting to really get things done with determination. He lacked determination. A few weeks ago, I started to notice that my house needed a good cleaning. Fine dust was accumulating in the corners of the living room. Holes were appearing in the wooden furniture. At first, I thought it was my carelessness in cleaning, but when Mark came home early from work one night, he quickly identified the problem. Termites. They invaded our home without us even noticing. We tried everything and even paid a lot for homemade and industrial products, even a handyman from the neighborhood who swore he was an expert in pollution. Nothing worked. After much insistence, on my part, we agreed to call a specialized team. The quote was high, but there was no alternative. They explained that to completely eliminate the termites, it would be necessary to disinfect the house, which would require us to be away for a whole week. It wasn't enough to be poor, right? You have to be away from home and still lack money. But things were just beginning. That's when the real problem arose. Where would we stay with our tight budget? I thought about asking a friend for shelter, but Mark was blunt. We'll stay at my father's house. He lives alone, has space, and will welcome us with open arms. He said this without giving me time to protest. The idea made me uncomfortable. Mark's father, Mr. Alfred, was a reserved man of few words, but he had a certain smile that made me happy. You know, we were never close, and his presence reminded me of farm days, something rustic and systematic, as if he could see all the good things in life. There was no other option. That same night, we quickly packed our bags and headed to his house. It was an old one-story building located in a remote neighborhood and surrounded by trees and silence. When we parked the car, I thought about it, wondering if it would be worth it. Something about the place seemed to warn me that that week would have surprises. Mr. Alfred greeted us at the door with a discreet, almost formal smile. He shook Mark's hand, gave me a brief wave, and invited us in. He showed us where we would be staying. A small guest room at the back of the house with a cramped bed and windows covered by heavy curtains that barely allowed air to circulate. "Make yourself comfortable," he said before disappearing towards his own room. Mark seemed at ease, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. This week away from home wouldn't just be a temporary inconvenience. It would be the beginning of something that would change my life forever. That night, while Mark left for work, I stayed quiet, thinking about my cell phone and observing the house. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I looked at the yellowed walls and the ceiling fan that was spinning lazily. The distant sound of a television on, probably in Mr. Alfred's room, was the only thing that broke the silence. I was still trying to get used to the environment when I heard 3 soft knocks on the door. "Laurie?" Hearing your deep voice on the other side, I made some soup. "I thought you might want to have dinner." I hesitated for a moment. Despite our cordial relationship, the idea of having dinner alone and trying something new for me was still on my mind. But I didn't want to seem rude. I got up, opened the door, and answered, "Oh, sure, thank you, Mr. Alfred. I'll be right there." I went to the kitchen, which was small and cozy, but full of objects that looked like they had been used for decades. He was sitting at the table waiting for me, his hands folded on the wooden surface. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair opposite. I waited a few minutes until he broke the silence. "I hope it's to your liking." "It's great, thanks." "You for your concern," I replied, trying to sound natural. He conveyed a calmness, and his eyes fixed on me for a moment longer than I considered normal. I thought, tasting the soup, that it was wonderful, what it would be like if I had played a chef for a moment. I thought about starting a conversation, but I didn't know what to say. I just watched the pumpkin from afar. Sometimes the fruit would throw a sweet melon into my mind. After dinner, he collected the dishes and began washing them, dismissing my offer of help with a quick wave of his hand. "You look uncomfortable here," he said, not looking at me as he rinsed the dishes. "It's not that," I'm just trying to get used to it, I replied, feeling my cheeks flush. He paused for a moment, letting the water run, then turned to me with a small smile, something I'd never seen on his face before. Don't worry, sorry. If I may say so, you're welcome here. It's your home too, I agreed, smiling back and expressing my gratitude. The night had become a silent ally, shrouding the house in a cloak of mystery. The lights in the hallway had been turned off, and the only sign of life came from the living room, where the muffled sound of the television still echoed like a distant murmur. I knew that this moment would change everything, but something inside me no longer wanted to resist. After hours of talking, or perhaps avoiding real conversation, the air felt thicker. Every glance we exchanged was an unanswered question. Every accidental touch felt deliberate. He was leaning back on the couch, his arms crossed over his chest while I tried to maintain a casual posture. My heart was pounding in my chest like an out-of-beat drum, but it was then that he spoke, his deep voice breaking the silence like a low thunderclap. You look tired, sorry. It must be hard to deal with all this. His words caught me off guard, not because of their kindness, but because of the way they held a hidden meaning, as if he knew exactly what I had been hiding beneath layers of smiles, obligations, and superficial conversation. I swallowed hard, searching for an answer, but all I could muster was a weak, "Yeah, it's been hard." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, and his eyes met mine. You don't have to pretend with me, he said, his voice as soft as a night breeze. We all have our moments of weakness. His words felt like an unspoken release, like he was giving me permission to be vulnerable. Or maybe it was just an excuse. Without thinking much, I got up from the couch and walked to the window. The curtains were slightly parted, allowing the silvery moonlight to partially illuminate the room. I stood there for a moment, watching the shadows dance on the opposite wall, until I felt his presence behind me. He was close. So close I could taste the pumpkin. His tone was demanding, almost as if he himself were fighting the inevitable. But when his hand brushed my arm, any doubt seemed to evaporate. I turned slowly, my eyes locked in a silent duel. It was then that he brought his hand to my face, his fingers tracing a delicate line from my temple to my cheek. It was a gesture, full of implicit promise, and I felt my body respond involuntarily, as if every nerve ending was awakening after years of lethargy. Carefully, he moved his hand down my neck, tracing a slow, exploratory path. When he reached my shoulders, I noticed that he hesitated, as if asking permission to go further. Without saying a word, I offered him a hand. The melons were out there, ready as fruit to be picked. There was something poetic in the way he acted, as if each word was chosen with care to avoid crossing invisible boundaries. However, the intensity of his gestures said more than any sentence could express. The most interesting thing about that moment was that his face, now aligned with the center of my body, made me feel his light breath against my skin. It was like being on the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next step would be irreversible. When he started, it was as if time stopped. It was like comparing that feeling of waves lapping the sand on the beach, a hypnotic back and forth, capable of transporting anyone to another world. After that, I didn't want to throw the pumpkin aside. It was there for me, hungry. I ate it like a professional, exploring every corner and smiling. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal, until I remembered what had happened the night before. As I got ready, I looked at the vanity and saw the joy of a smile and a job done. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Alfred seemed kinder, almost protective, while I felt torn between guilt and freedom. Still, I couldn't help but sneak in, those stolen moments when Mark was deep in his sleep. They were quick encounters, full of urgency, as if we knew time was running out. But what really started to bother me was Alfred's behavior. He seemed distracted. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't read, as if he were harboring a secret too heavy to share. One night, while we were in the living room after one of these encounters, he handed me a thick manila envelope, crumpled at the edges. "This is for you," he said, his voice low and deep, almost a whisper. but don't open it until you're alone. The envelope had a strange weight, as if it held something other than papers. I held it for a few seconds, trying to figure it out. But Alfred had already gotten up and gone into the backyard, leaving me there with more questions than answers. When I finally had a moment of privacy, I locked the guest room door and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, I found several folded sheets of paper and a small, rusty key. The pages were carefully scrawled with names, details, and amounts. It was like a diary of financial transactions, but there was more. Printed photos showed people I didn't know, some clearly important figures in the city. One caught my eye immediately, a grainy image of Alfred, years younger, standing next to a man I recognized at a glance. The mayor. My heart raced. Whatever Alfred was involved in was beyond anything I could have imagined. I flipped through the papers again until I found a handwritten letter in a neat, elegant script. Sorry, if you're reading this, it means things have taken a turn I hope to avoid. These documents are my protection, and now they're yours too. Trust no one, not even Mark. There's more to this story than meets the eye right now. The key opens a safe deposit box in the bank. You'll find out what it is. The letter ended without a signature, but the handwriting was unmistakably his. Alfred was not only a private man, he kept secrets too big to live in that modest house. And now somehow I was involved in them. The next morning, Alfred was different. His gaze was distant, as if he were somewhere else. When I tried to ask him about the envelope, he simply shook his head and said, "Sorry, I'll explain it to you better someday. Just keep it." He said this as he pulled the handle aside, smiling and thanking me. The words echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. I knew I had to make a decision, but each path seemed to lead to an abyss. Keeping the documents would mean a radical change in my financial life. Then one night, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps in the yard, muffled voices coming from outside the house. Alfred was outside, talking to someone in a tense, low tone. I tried to listen, but the words were unintelligible. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, ready to confront him, but before I could open the door, I heard a sharp cracking noise. Then, silence. Mark, oblivious to everything, began to act strangely. He began to check his phone constantly, and would go out at night without giving any explanation. One night while he was sleeping, I picked up his phone and realized that he wasn't looking for work. In fact, he was spending the little money he had on some women in the nightlife. That, man, took a weight off my conscience. In the end, he didn't care about anything. The day we finally decided to go back to our house, something unexpected happened. I took one last look at Alfred, who was watching from the window with an indecipherable expression. He raised his hand, in a gesture of farewell, but his eyes said something different. "Whenever you can, come back, and if you need anything, you can ask me." That's just to make you think about whether it's worth continuing. Alfred had given me a great opportunity to be free, and that's what I did. I got home and said, honestly, let's go, live our lives and be happy. I think we've had enough at home. I packed my bags and we went far away, living our lives in peace. And every day we have fun. So, my loves, I hope you enjoyed this story.